Welcome to the show, everybody. Micah with Coronavirus Diaries, and today I'm fortunate enough to reconnect with Gabriel Aguilera, an artist, a teacher, and a social justice activist. Luis, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. So for the viewers and listeners that maybe aren't aware of you or what you do, could you briefly fill us in?
Yeah, thank you. So as you said, I am a teacher. I'm a Hatha yoga teacher as well as a language teacher, and I'm currently taking a TEFL course online to finish up for a certification for a 120-hour course, which hopefully I'll be able to do some type of remote work with that. I also am teaching about 4 students currently. One of them actually is my roommate slash landlord slash friend. And we've been working nonstop, Monday through Friday, for the last 5 to 6 weeks. And we're just about to enter the 6th or the 7th week of Hatha yoga training with him. So that's what I do. I do a little bit of light trading as well in the morning sometimes, depending on my moods. And yeah, in terms of the social justice activism, I disseminate a lot of information, both research and political, via various social media channels. And I do other things, which more than anything, I keep to myself. Yeah, I don't divulge all the tricks of the trade, you know.
You're a
But
creator. Yeah.
I am a creator, so I'm active with that, and I also produce music using a DAW digital audio workstation, and I make ambient music and techno, and I do that on the weekends as a way to decompress from the week.
Work-life balance, huh?
Absolutely, all the time.
Well, speaking of work-life balance, the last time we had talked, you had shared what it was Hatha yoga, or was it a different form of yoga? It was a program or a
I
session.
gave what I shared was to you. I sent you a link just a very general introductory yoga a sequence of consisting of 20 poses that could be used for the beginner, the intermediate level, and also the advanced level. And but yeah, I would say it's Hatha yoga. I would
Okay.
call it that. It's a lot more. I don't want to call it static because there is movement happening even with each and every still pose occurring. But yeah, I would call it Hatha yoga.
Yeah. So I had got the link, kind of put it off for a while, and eventually got to a point where I said, I'm gonna try it out. I've
Hmm.
done some yoga before. I've had some, and they've all been pretty decent experiences. But I figured I'd give this a go, and it was interesting. It seems to shine a lot of introspect into your own self-awareness, whether that's through the breathing or the understanding of where your body is in position to your environment. Case in point, it was something as simple as I don't remember the name of the pose, but you're like a kind of like a peak, a mountain, and they're talking about whether your heels, if they can't quite make it all the way down, like you're supposed to try to be pushing them down.
Hmm.
And if you're not able to, it's like, yeah, it's all good, but eventually you're going to want to make that incremental adjustment and change. And there's this, it adds to the pose and the posture and everything. Just that little bit of awareness is pretty unique. So curious, why do you think, for a beginner that has maybe never really done it, or maybe doesn't think that it would be beneficial? I know what it did for me, but why do you think it would be beneficial for a beginner or somebody to give it a try and go after it?
You know, that's an interesting question because one of the things that I pointed out to my student currently that I work with on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, Monday to Friday, is that we were doing the first session and I mentioned, hey, why don't you try lifting up your toes during a mountain pose? And he was taken aback, like lifting my toes. I go, yeah, lift them up. And he took a look at mine, and then he took a look at his, and he tried lifting them up, but he had it was an irregular way of lifting them up, and he didn't have complete control over them. And then I showed him how I was lifting mine up, and I said, and you know, I had a little burst of laughter, not to make fun of him, but I had recalled how it was for me when I first started out. And
Sure.
I also couldn't really raise my toes too well. I didn't really have much control over them. And so what occurs in the early stages is you start to reconnect with your body. You start to reconnect with parts of your body in a physical way that you have not given any care or attention to. And that's a huge deal.
Yeah.
That's really taking care of yourself. And one of the other things we did with that session was earlier, before we got up to mountain pose, which when we were standing, we were on the floor even before we began the sequence. And I said, let's rub our feet. And he looked at me, as strange as anybody would. And I'm like, you're on your feet all day, and your feet are taking so much punishment from the floor, right? So much punishment from gravity itself. And a lot of us tend to not give care to ourselves. So it's so fundamental to do that for ourselves if we want to um, alleviate our own suffering and progress in life. Because a lot of this so-called suffering or these irritations or these frustrations are kind of what keeps us from looking around and being aware of things, right? If we're
Sure.
absorbed in that sort of mental state of suffering, which is physical too, and frustration, which is psychological and that sort of thing, it prevents us from looking ahead and seeing, hey, what is there for us? And so I think even in the early stages, you get that raising of awareness right away. And even in the simplest poses, you're going to be getting that right away. So,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
great. How do you think that carries over to other aspects of life, whether it's, work or play or focus or, emotional management, how does it play a role with that?
Well, why don't you answer that question in the sense that when you were doing the poses, and so you did 20 poses, correct?
The video, yeah, if that's
Yeah,
how many
right.
there were.
So
Yeah.
so you did 20 poses. Were there pauses in between poses?
It was more just kind of trying to watch on the computer, go through the
Hmm.
process. It was, I guess you would say, shifting from one to the other in a
Right.
sense.
And so,
Yeah.
but there's these gaps, right?
Yeah.
And you start minding the gap is what I call it. And I think I've heard that somewhere else as well. But you're minding these gaps, and that translates into other arenas in your life. So say, for instance, when I do like trading or something like that, and I'm looking at numbers going up and down, I'm not consumed by what I'm watching on the screen. I am mindful of what I'm watching on the screen. And then I can see clearly the gap of where I need to be, where I would like to go. And I'm not making an impulsive purchase or sale. What I'm doing is I am feeling it out, logically understanding what's going on, and not being taken in by the moment, but still being part of the moment and observing it for what it is, and then making that decision in a nanosecond. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, and I'm speaking from a point of where I've advanced after 15 years of practice. But I realized early on the benefits of this because what it did, it put a pause to some of the suffering in my own life. I had a lower back issue that was really painful. And once I was relieved of that, and that was in the first week of practicing yoga, once I was relieved of that, it gave me pause to reflect about a lot of other things that were going on in my life.
Sure.
And that immediately is what inspired me to continue doing it in one sense. And so those pauses can help in many different ways. With music, the way I listen to music now is, instead of what it is that I want to put into it, into a landscape of space, I start thinking about the actual spaces in between the sounds, and how can
Yeah.
I weave my sounds within those spaces, or create more space for myself to to manifest what it is that I'm thinking and feeling at the time, and the
Oh,
direction I want to take the music.
yeah, it's a great example. I've always heard that with music,
Hmm.
the empty space is as important, if not more important, than the space that's filled. with a sound or vocal, like vocals or a beat. It's the open space that allows the movement of the overall, the bigger picture of the sound or the
Right.
songs.
And interestingly enough, like right now during my TEFL course, I'm learning about rhythm. I'm learning about, stress in English and how it works, how things are broken up. And there you go again, it's that pause. I'm minding that gap. So I'm being very conscious that that gap is there for a reason. And once you get to that point, and this is again a very advanced stage, you're able to then start working with it much better. And so you're not taken in by the event of the moment. You're observing it, and you know where to plug and play at that time. So you can as you develop in the hatha yoga practice, you're able to commit or not commit to an action without a sense of feeling that you're being pulled by the event itself.
So it sounds like you're talking a lot about emotional intelligence.
It is definitely some emotional intelligence that's going on, and there's a raising of that. Eventually, there's at the early stages, what Hatha Yoga is trying to do is harmonize the body and mind, okay? And so that takes some time, and it depends on whether you're practicing daily or whether you're practicing once a week. It varies, and it also depends on the condition that you are in originally when you first began. And so there's no clear-cut answer as to, oh, this is going to take 2-3 months for me to achieve
Sure.
that level, or 6 months, or a year, or 5 years. Obviously, with more regular practice and more regular, genuine practice and healthy practice, you'll achieve a little bit more. But what happens is you're able to expand that sense of mind gap in your practice. Okay.
Sure.
And so the breathing is actually helping you, because as you breathe, you're learning how to take in air in the appropriate manner, because there are different types of breath as well in yoga. And so you're inhaling and you're oxygenating your entire body appropriately. So you're cleaning up your system. You're
Right.
nourishing your system. You're detoxifying. And then you reach a point of apex where it's just the silence, the gap. And this starts to open up a little bit more with more and more practice, and at the exhale, you also begin to release, let go of it. And also you pause, and this begins to open up a little bit more. And that's translating in so many different ways, neurologically, and cellular level, but psychological level, emotional level. So yes, you're right. It is emotional intelligence that's being raised, but you're also starting to raise a lot of other capacities that you already have at the same time.
Yeah,
And that's the beauty of the practice.
that's great. This is something I had noticed is through the poses, you're even the simple thing of like roll your shoulders back, give your rib cage, kind of release some of the weight off of it, and it just kind of, I don't know, maybe it's sitting in a chair all day and hunched over at a computer that just kind of rolls you over. But it's amazing how, you just make that conscious effort to just roll your shoulders back.
But we could stop right there. And that's a lot that we can take in right now. You're experiencing a physiological relief. You're experiencing an emotional relief. You're experiencing a sense of gratitude and appreciation for that activity that you just committed to. And you're also strengthening your body. You're creating flexibility, which leads to plasticity and that sort of thing, and XYZ, right? And so you're doing all these great things to your body all at once, and you haven't treated your body like that in a while, right?
It was real, when
Yeah.
I first went into it, they just started talking about, and I'm aware of it. I'm aware that sometimes they'll hunch over, and that'll then impact breathing. And once you impact your breathing, then it starts messing up all your stuff, right? But just within, it's anybody that does it, if they have any sort of a hunch at all or slouch, that little gesture, it really doesn't take, one, it doesn't take much effort. Two, it doesn't take a lot of time, but you'll notice immediately. It's almost like a instant gratification of like, holy smokes, there's something to this. So it's Yeah, it was nice. Just a simple movement that does all those things. And I hadn't thought of it like that.
Well, and you know, it's interesting because, and I explained this to my current student who stays here while he's doing his remote work. It's, you know, right now I'm seated in lotus position. And I'm not
Okay.
trying to, you know, nobody can see that I'm seated in lotus position. No one's going to walk into my room and look at me and go, oh, that looks cool. I'm not doing this to flash to anyone that, hey, this is a cool thing to do. I'm doing it because this is relieving some tension that I have in my hips and some other areas of my body. And I am literally self-caring at the moment while I'm having this interview with you. And maybe sometimes I'll do something like this, which is, you know, an Aikido wrist exercise, and I'm relieving the tension that's going on in my wrist and my tendons and you know, in my nerves and places that I feel that there's a level of tension. And this, then what happens is when you're on the mat, you're doing the self-care and you're reigniting the sense of self-care and the activity of self-care, which is later taken off the mat, and you are caring for yourself when you're off the mat, and that is absolutely beneficial to you, correct?
Yeah, it's like a perpetual sense of self-awareness.
So you're constantly working on these, you know, platforms of strength, and that you keep spiraling upward and upward and upward, and then that's where it starts to really start growing. And again, this isn't right away and automatic, where you reach these leaps and bounds in the first week, but you give it some time, and it starts giving you this type of system for yourself more and more, and you're replacing these more limiting behaviors that you have with these less limiting behaviors. And so like in yoga, we don't judge. It isn't about judging. It isn't saying, oh, this is good or bad, which is more limiting than something else. That's how we
Nice.
think about it. Yeah. So like, okay, so now I do this and it's less limiting than me sitting on my butt and feeling a little bit of pain in the back, right? Now I'm like
Right.
able to do a little stretching here and it feels great, you know, and
Sure.
why not? Right?
Why do you think it is that just people in general would find themselves removed from just the understanding of self? You know, like myself. How is it that over time you just allow yourself to maybe get that slouch? Is it just a repetitiveness and
That's a fantastic question. I think part of it is it's just not inculcated in society, in many societies. Um, we're on this rat race of hypercapitalism, and I have a master's degree in teaching, so I've done my clinicals. I've seen, you know, students from every level, from kindergarten all the way to high school level. And so I never saw that very much inculcated in people's programs, where there are aspects of personal self-development in a holistic manner. It just isn't part of a program. So how is it that we're going to, as a society or even as an
Western?
individual, Western, I don't, you know, I can't say that I've seen the entire world. I don't know how they do it everywhere else. But I've traveled in 33 states here in the United States. I've traveled extensively in Mexico, and I do my research, I read up and that sort of thing. And I don't see that in places like in the US, we don't have an educational system that promotes that for whatever reason.
They have
And
physical fitness, but it's go out, play baseball, go play soccer, go play.
right, exactly. And
Sure.
so, and this is different. You know, I don't want to get deep into the science of this, but this is different than regular exercise. I mean, it works on different parts of the system in a very different way, especially considering that we're working on breath from beginning. From the very
Sure.
beginning, we're working on breath, and which is probably one of the most important things you do, right? If not
Yeah.
the most important thing you do. I think
Oxygen.
I'm
Who doesn't like
absolutely.
oxygen?
Well, and I also mentioned to you, well, that's an interesting one. How many people smoke?
Oh,
That's a tough one, right? And it's not trying to belittle that person or trying to judge that person, but I mean, I'll be honest. I'll be quite honest and frank. I used to smoke cigarettes.
A lot of people did.
I did.
Yeah.
But then I started training and I realized this is really damaging to me and it doesn't make me feel good at all. And it felt good to some extent, but it doesn't at the end
The
of the
sense
day.
of feeling good, I think, would probably come from whether it's a small dose of
Hmm.
nicotine, the drug that goes in your
Right.
system.
Hmm.
But when I was much younger, when I was in the service, I had smoked cigarettes for a while,
Right.
and something that call them friends, like, oh,
Hmm.
like you got a friend no matter what, and it was just like this. You could separate yourself from like whatever's going on. It's like, I'm gonna go take a break, and it was almost like you build in this like thought of you need to have that cigarette to go step outside to get away from whatever the scenario was that was playing out. Um, so there was like a sense of maybe relief in that, is that it was almost an excuse to get outside or to go take a break. But yeah, it's not.
And you know, we have the neurological addiction to it, the psychological one, the chemical one, the cellular one, and that sort of thing. And just the fact that as humans, we're behavior driven, right? And so it's hard to break some of these habits. But with Hatha Yoga, what I noticed was how great I felt, and it was literally becoming something to the extent of like, well, I know what Boone's Farm tastes like, and I also know what $1,000 bottle of wine tastes like, and it was a decision between those two in terms of whether I should smoke or whether I should practice hatha yoga, and it was really easy for me to make that choice
Yeah.
because I can feel it, I can sense it, and I see the after effects of it on a daily basis, if not a minute to minute basis, and so that kind of convinces you right away what to do or what not to do.
Yeah, that's really how I found my way out of that. Was I eventually made a conscious decision, like it was impacting my cardio
Mm-hmm.
and my ability to perform basically
Mm-hmm.
physically.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it really, just being aware of that was enough for me to say, okay, it's not working, and it wasn't beneficial for me. So,
Well, and what's interesting is it's the practice itself almost acts like an intervention, but it's not somebody wagging its finger at you. It's
oh, sure.
it's just revealing to you. It's a very revelatory process, revealing to you what it is that you need to do for yourself to continue on that path of self-care, to continue on that path of self-discovery, and to up your game in the best way possible. And I think that's the benefit of one of the benefits of the whole practice.
Nice. Well, before we had jumped in this session, you'd suggested you'd be interested in working with me. I'm looking forward to,
I
at least
definitely would.
maybe start a little bit slow, a couple times a
Hmm.
week. But
Yeah.
I mean, after 1 hour of focusing on breathing, focusing on muscle, like relaxing muscle groups from your head to your toes, it goes a long ways. So I can see benefit in it. But earlier you had mentioned, and I see we're kind of getting to that point in
Yeah.
time, but you mentioned light day trading. I know that you enjoy trading a little bit on your end, and I'm currently been playing in crypto for a little while now. And before we started the session, I had shared, or I'd asked if you had seen what had happened with crypto in just the last 24 hours, because there's a lot of things happening, and uh, Bitcoin is supposed to be, there is halving. For anybody that's familiar with crypto and Bitcoin, the halving is happening in May. It's supposed to be every 4 years, and long story short, it reduces the benefits of mining for the miners. So in theory, makes the value more,
Jump up.
because they have to have higher processing power. It takes more effort to basically computate the algorithms of blockchain.
Hmm.
So upgrade hardware, do more, get less. So the value is supposed to go up. So right now crypto's getting a little volatile, but it's been doing good for me. But just recently I was looking at it going, you know what, maybe I sell. And I was getting somewhat emotional on
Hmm.
the volatility, because if you're not careful and you're watching this stuff daily, it can swing many percentages. It's not necessarily like stocks, but in terms of your own trading, and your own process. How do you think having yoga integrated into your routine helps you with decision making and quantifying or qualifying data and analysis, and then actions and executions?
Right. Well, I mean, for the first part, it relieves me, the practice relieves me of my distractions, uh, be they agitations or things that actually I'm hankering for, or I'm trying to attach myself to. Maybe I have a desire, and you don't bring those things to the mat, or at least you try not to bring them to the mat, and you don't try to force them out from yourself when you're on the mat. You just let them pass, and you learn how to let them pass. So because I'm practicing that, and then I come back to the screen and I'm doing my work, be it light trading or anything else, um, I am looking at the reality of the situation as best as I can, given the amount of information that I've taken in and digested prior to the trade. Um, and I'm looking at the situation for what it is, and I am not giving in to allowing distractions to lead me one way or another. So I'm operating at a very optimal level. And that makes me a very effective and efficient trader at that point. And so I think that's key. I mean, I don't get the butterflies when I see something drop 10%, because I know full well that maybe that someone on the other end is just trying to shake us off from a trade.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I also can drum up logical reasons why that would be the case. And so the processing occurs in a much cleaner, more efficient manner, versus having the emotions lead me left and right. And I think that's obviously a benefit that comes from having practice on the mat. That it's interesting, but they do practice in India. Their special forces in the mountains of the Himalayas, they practice yoga. They have been
Special
practicing it.
forces.
Yeah, so special forces. An article came out, I think, last year talking about them. So they have them do these types of exercises, and I mean that in the West, not in the Western sense, but in the sense of these are the routines they do. But they are practicing a certain poses in yoga just to bring about some level of equanimity to themselves, so that when and if something occurs, they're performing with equanimity. So that's the same thing as when I'm doing my work, whether I'm making music or trading. I'm performing with equanimity. That doesn't mean I don't have passion for what it is that I'm working on. That just means that I am not controlled by that passion. There's a very, 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 very tiny distinction there, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm observer of my own passion, and I'm geeked. I'm geeked when I do something, but I'm not allowing that sensation to overcome the capacity and the skill of what it is that I need to do to perform at that level.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
Oh, 100%. It's
Right.
great. It's awareness. It's a full scale awareness of some sort.
It is an awareness, but it also shouldn't be understood that it is something that you can have an ideation over and accomplish. You have to experience it. I can tell you all these pretty words of what Hatha Yoga will do to you, and now because you've actually experienced it. And I may have been able to present the same discussion to you that I just did in the last 15 minutes, and you could have probably understood it very well, but having experienced it gives it a very different understanding for you, a very different understanding, and that's why I practice.
Yeah, I entirely agree. It reminds me of a thought or a theory that when you go to school or university, you really only learn about 20%, excuse me, of the profession, or the kind of what it is that you need to know in order to do the tasks that you're going to be given, and the other 80% is learned on the job. So get your training, get your foundational understanding, and then go in and start making mistakes and start, experiencing. And then that's where you gain the majority of your understanding for the tasks and your ability to perform and achieve. Sounds a lot like what you're suggesting with yoga. Is you can do all the research and watch all the videos you want and build an understanding of what it should do and how it's supposed to do it. But until you actually do it, you'll never actually truly experience it.
Right. And there's stages. It's something that, hatha means union with the divine. Well, that's one of the meanings, or in Sanskrit, yoga means union with the divine. So you're reaching these points where you're appreciating infinity. And so, but what I found with the practice is
can I back you up really?
Yeah.
That's an interesting thought. What does it mean? The infinity, or the affinity, or the infinity? The
infinity, everything, the whole shebang.
So what does that mean if you can bottle it up in a I'm gonna make it a little difficult. Louis, I want to know the meaning of everything in a sentence. No.
It's extremely difficult. It's wow, that's a really tough one, right? For me, the practice keeps just getting better and better and better and better and better and better and better. I find no end to how good it is for me, and no limit in what I can achieve with it. And maybe it is the Tao. Maybe I just call it the Tao. Maybe it's this infinite universe that we're in or not in, however way you want to view it, right?
Right.
The everything. I can't really say what it is, just like the Tao. It's the unspeakable, the unmentionable, the unnameable, right? It's just the whole thing, the whole shebang. It's definitely different than anything I've ever experienced. But it's definitely a lot more than anything I've ever experienced too, in the best way. Yeah. So I don't know. I really don't have you're going to have me thinking now for eternity.
I'm glad I could help.
That one, right?
No
pun intended.
Something else you mentioned is, you can't really quantify how long until someone starts getting, the true nature and the effects and the results. It reminds me of something that I just spoken with another individual that's on the show, Joe Sabula, is a physical trainer, and we were discussing like these high performing athletes as opposed to just regular people. Where it was a cool session talking about credits and debits, like in training and physical fitness, how you can exert so much, but you have to also, there's like a give and take. And something that he shared was just an understanding of, if there's somebody that's working on their craft, their trade, whether that's running fast, climbing high, fighting, whatever, swimming, if they're putting in 4 hours a day, and say 6 days a week and taking an off day, compared to a person that's putting in 1 hour a day, 3 days a week, at the end of a year, 52 weeks, the numbers are drastically different. You're talking like a 10 times, difference between one versus the other. And I suppose that would be very similar to any practice, which is like yoga. If you're only doing it a couple times a week, whereas if somebody else is doing it 6 or 7 days a week, you're probably going to start to see a significant difference within a shorter amount of time between the two people and how they're responding to it and how they're incrementally making those adjustments.
One of the aspects of yoga is letting go, right? And so you're relieving yourself. You're letting go of a lot of things. And in that letting go, the flexibility occurs, right? And I realized, it even helped my disc golf game, because I love playing disc golf. And there was one time where I had the disc in my hand, and this thing was, my basket was about 250 feet away from me, maybe a little bit more than that, but I want to keep it at 250, so it's not a big, whale story here. And I felt it. I knew it was going to go in, and I chucked it. I sent it flying, and I had a first eagle that first time. And I let go and I just accepted for it to be what it was. And I could feel the thing traveling through the air. And I knew I was going to get it in. But I knew before I shot it that I was going to get it in. And it wasn't confidence or arrogance. It just felt perfect. And so there's this aspect of the raising of the intuitiveness that occurs during the practice. And it's continuous, this raising of the intuitiveness. And so that's why I have a very difficult time explaining some of these things. And I would rather just sense it and feel it for myself. But other people do see it. And I do see the manifestations of that in the work that I do. And just like I saw it when that disc went right into the basket, and I knew. And by the way, I had already been practicing yoga then by like 10 years or something like that. And so yeah, that's one of the things that happens with this practice.
It's interesting because I think probably everybody's had it at least once in their life where whether you're playing basketball and you shoot and that there's that split second instance where you're like, it's in and you can like turn away and you just know it's going to go in. And then
Right.
you're saying that's intuitiveness to the experience or the process of things that are happening.
And with the Hatha Yoga, this is the science. That's what it's meant to do. It is the science of harmonizing body and mind at the early stages. And that's just at the early stages. It keeps advancing past that point.
What I want to know is, when can I float?
I mean, that's up to you.
I saw this really cool, I don't know if it's like a documentary about Tibetan monks in frigid, freezing temperatures with a cold, wet cloth on them, and they will steam it dry and keep their body temperature.
There is a technique for that. And that was actually studied at Harvard. Harvard University did a study of that. Yes, and you can look that up. And so now that we have Google, people can look it up and find out that, yeah, this does occur. Yes, there's through some very, a breathing technique that I do not do myself. And I have tried, but I wasn't ready for it yet. They've been able to raise their temperatures. Don't quote me, but anywhere between 5-10 degrees, maybe more.
Yeah, it was significant watching it. You're watching it steam. It's steaming and it's in the middle of winter. You're like, what? This doesn't even, they're supposed to be shivering and cold and shaking and like not managing the cold, and they were doing just fine. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can look at the study and we can look at see what's happening. We've talked about this before. There's gray matter that are, with meditation exercises and with some levels of hatha yoga and yoga in general, you'll have an increase in gray matter where it wasn't there before. So these things seem and sound fantastic. But again, if you can't even raise your toes and after a while you're in control, that might seem very fantastic to some people, right?
Right. Like raising one eyebrow as opposed to both. Right.
Yeah. And these are the so-called oddities, or these are the sort of like really cool things that you can do. But the best part is that you're getting in touch with yourself. You're reconnecting with that essence of self-care. And one of the most important things in yoga in general, authentic yoga, is service. And you're giving self-care, which is a service to yourself. And then you're giving service to everything else around you, including the people you love, in the best way possible. And so here I am, I'm delicately looking at my traits and I'm giving it intense care, but that is then transferred over to a person as well. And there's care for that person as well. But it can't happen if you're not doing that for yourself, first and foremost.
Yeah.
You can't. How can you care?
It's the old adage, you gotta love yourself before you can love someone else.
Absolutely. How can you? It's like if you're if you're frustrated, upset, and angry because you're sore and in pain, you're not going to be providing too much care for others in that state. Maybe begrudgingly, but but that is that care, and you need to ask yourself those questions. So yeah, so I see ultimately those are the real benefits. It's not floating in the air, but
Yeah, right.
we can hope to get there.
I mean, why not?
I think it would be fun. um I am not going to share the weird stuff that I've seen in my meditations and in the advanced stages of yoga at all.
Yeah.
But it's pretty cool. It's really cool. Yeah.
I mean, I find it really interesting that it's a little off topic maybe, but
Hmm.
in terms of mindset and processing, and then just kind of chemically with your body. So there's like deprivation tanks, and
Hmm.
uh, there's many stories of people where if you go into, what is it, the saline, uh,
Hmm.
the beds that you like lay in, and there's like sensory deprivation, you're floating. A lot of
Yeah.
people will say that if, when you have nothing, your mind will start creating, you'll start seeing stuff, and you're in it, if you're in a deprivation chamber, or I'm forgetting what the name of these things are.
No. I've been in one. I've been in one here in Chicago on Lincoln Avenue. I've been in one for an hour, and
Did you have that experience where
it felt like it. First of all, it felt very comfortable because you're just like half floating in this saline water solution. It feels a little slimy though in there,
yeah,
but the feeling that I really enjoyed was that there was no noise, there was no sound, there was no lights, nothing, and that felt really, really, really good. It wasn't terrifying. I think some people would get terrified. Um, what else? I mean, it felt like 15 minutes. It did not feel like an hour. And I remember paying for an hour. I'm like, whoa, this is over? Like, I want more.
yeah,
And there was almost a wanting of nothingness for a while. I did not do any ideation. I just simply explored the darkness in that environment.
it's cool.
And it was very cool. It was very cool. I'd had a similar experience like that when I was 18 years old, because some gang members had basically beaten me to a pulp, and I explored the darkness there. And what was interesting was
What you
that
mean, like when you were blacked out, like passed out?
after I was passed out, I explored the depths of the abyss, as I want to say it.
You looked into the abyss.
I
Did it
looked
look
into the
back?
abyss. Yeah, it was me in lotus position. It was pretty cool, and
Wow.
it really was though. But it was a sense of peace, and it was similar to the sense of peace that I got in the deprivation tank. And with hatha yoga, I get that sense of peace every time I practice, and every time I'm off the mat, I'm able to trigger that sense of peace as well with an activity or just to pause. And so as you advance in in your practice, you're able to translate what is happening on the mat um, almost instantaneously off the mat. And I think that's a really wonderful gift that you receive.
That's a beautiful thought, and I think it's a perfect way to kind of end this session. Was there anything else that you wanted to touch base on that you don't feel like we were able to reach?
No, I think we have everything for now. I just, as always, highly recommend it for everyone, and especially in these times,
Definitely.
because getting centered is so important, not just when the storm's gone, but during the storm, and maybe even more so during the storm.
Right.
Right.
For the viewers and listeners that are interested, check out the about section below. I'll include all of Luis's double S's. I'll include all of his information below.
I always had that problem too. I was like, Luis's.
All of his information will be in the about section below, as well as the short hour session link that you shared with me. And yeah, it would be interesting to hear what others' thoughts are. Luis, thank you as always for jumping on the show. It's greatly appreciated.
All right, thank you. Thank you for having me. Okay.
Anytime. For everybody else, stick around. We'll have more of this content coming your way here shortly. Later.
Cheers.